Who Dat Nation, welcome into the podcast. Tonight, we'll be previewing the Houston Texans against the New Orleans Saints, and we'll be talking about the injury updates, everything going around across the league, and of course, hanging out with the greatest nation in all of sports. And if you're not familiar with who that nation is, well, don't worry. We actually like that you're dense because that means that you can put up with the ridiculousness that is the Saints. So you kind of have to have a little denseness to you, like a nice, I would say a good like sponge cake. It's actually the opposite of that, but hey, nobody said that revenue had a bake. Anyway, welcome in. Who Dat, God bless. Glad y'all are having a great Thursday. I'm speaking into existence. Why? Because football's coming up, and no matter what side of the debate you are when it comes to the Sean Payton era, well, the Broncos play tonight against Taylor Swift and the Kansas City Chiefs. Taylor Swift, of course, being the head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs. Really excited to see her dating one of her players, which is really, really cool. So we're going to talk tonight about the New Orleans Saints and have a good time. Who Dat to you, those who are here on the show live. We absolutely love every single one of y'all. TJ, Lester, Beacon, 992 Ras, Mac 10s, AJ, Rainey, Steve B, the Antonio, Pops TG, good to see Ken Duel. Where's Mr. Jerry at? Mr. Jerry's usually like one of the first people. You know what? Who Dat to all y'all. Welcome on in. Love every single one of you. If you don't think I love you, well, you're crazy. Because I do. You think I come on this show for me? You're wrong. I come on this show for you because the Who Dat Nation is incredible. I can talk to myself all by myself. I don't need to have a podcast for that, but I do need to have a podcast to talk to y'all. And that's what makes this place so unique, so special. James Griffon, good to see you, man. Got to say a little with a little accent and a little flavor in the name. You got to. Who Dat to you. We're going to start tonight going over the injury report because I know those who like to listen to the show after it airs, whether it be on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeart Radio, wherever you want to talk reports. Y'all want to know who's playing. I will add real quick. We will discuss the Trevor Penning situation. Now, he might actually end up getting benched here. I'm curious to see if that gets finalized. I was talking to, I'll put it this way. I have conflicting reports. Let me just go ahead and say, I don't know what's happening Sunday. But I will try to give you what I do know, or at least what I heard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you two different things that I heard. And then I'm going to tell you that I don't know if either one of them is true. I'm not just saying things for like talking sake. It's just been a talking point. So it's not like I'm bringing this up to start drama. I'm just going to let you know what has been said. But to start with the injury report, your New Orleans Saints have got a little bit of a long one here. And I'll do like we did last week. We'll actually put it on the screen so that y'all can see it for yourselves. But we're going to start off with, and again, this is just as it's been reported. I'm not like, okay, you're going to see here on the screen in a second. I guess it's not too terrible. It depends on how you define terrible. Juwan Johnson is still out. He had a brief injury. It felt like a brief injury right before the Tampa Bay game and has not played since. He is DNP with his calf injury. Lonnie Johnson, hamstring injury, DNP. Adam Prentice, the fullback, who, in my opinion, had a really rough game in this past week against the New England Patriots. He is missing time with a knee injury. Let's go ahead and say, hey, Taysom Hill, you can be the H-back / fullback. You go ahead and do it, buddy, because woof. JT Gray, the Pro Bowler and the standout backup for us, is currently DNP with a hamstring injury as well. Landon Young, backup tackle, which this could be very critical if it is true that Trevor Penning is getting benched. Again, I'm not confirming it. I'm just saying there's been a heavy discussion this week, started by the folks over at New Orleans.football. That could be a big deal when it comes to your depth. Then you've got Chris Olave, who had a toe injury, is full participation. He did have that. He was working that out against New England. Could have contributed to some of the little bit of a setback he's had over the past couple of weeks. Obviously, not his numbers that he's used to putting out. We'll see how that goes. Derek Carr is full participation with that right shoulder AC sprain. James Hurst is up to full participation, which listed as guard / tackle here. I wonder what that means. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Dennis Allen made it a point to talk about how important Hurst is to the future of this team. Now, I'll go ahead and say I don't necessarily agree with that, but it was a thing. So take that with the grains of salt that sprinkle all over the place. Now, to be fair, by the way, Hurst has been listed as a guard / tackle for forever. But Andres Pete is fully healthy with his concussion. And I went and looked around the league. Now, I did not gather numbers, so call this anecdotal, if you will. I have to sneeze. Sorry for that. I had to sneeze. But Andres Pete is coming back from concussion, but I looked around the league and it seems to be that the independent evaluators are basically, they're very strict this year when it comes to concussion protocol. And you're not seeing almost anybody who has a concussion make it through the next week, even if it's their first concussion, third concussion, whatever. So they seem to be playing that much stricter this season. We'll see if that ends up being the case. Now, over on the Texas side of the ball, there's also a very long injury list, but the injury list is not as, daunting because there's not many DNPs. So they have a longer list, but these guys are also practicing. So Laramie Tunzel, the star left tackle, if you want Carl Granderson to have arguably his toughest matchup of the season, it against a healthy Laramie Tunzel. He's very good, but knee injury was DNP yesterday, back to practicing today. Shaquille Griffin at corner is back to practice with a calf injury. Tank, who has a concussion, is the only DNP. Again, talking about seems to be an issue where, I guess we can't call it an issue. Maybe they are trying to actually look out for the health of the players, where if you are a guy who suffered a concussion, you might miss a minimum of 1 week, almost guaranteed, it seems. Both Cesar Ruiz and Honors Pete having that same thing. You go over to Robert Woods, another one of their wide receivers. He's a veteran who's getting a little bit of a rest. He is limited today. Moving on to Malik Collins, actually a guy that I was actually really excited about in the draft process when he was coming into the league. He is back to participating in full with an abdomen injury. Then you got linebacker Blake Cashman with a wrist injury. He is full. George Fant, another one of their tackles, part of that depth of that group there, he's full. Christian Harris, one of their linebackers, coming back from a concussion, limited participation. You got Shaquille Mason, one of their guards, back to full with an ankle injury. Noah Brown, one of the wide receivers with a groin injury, he's full. Titus Howard at tackle, he's full. And then you got Josh Jones at guard, he's full. Another hand injury. Denzel Perryman, I didn't even know he was still in the league, to be honest with you. Denzel Perryman at full. And then finally, Taveri Thomas at full. So there is your injury report for the New Orleans Saints going against the Houston Texans this upcoming week. Very, very curious how New Orleans is going to respond to this opportunity, because look, I still have a lot of the feelings I do about this team, as in confidence is admittedly a little low. That said, you're 3-2, and if you beat the Houston Texans at 4-2, you reach a point where you got to say, hey, even if things aren't perfect, some things are working. Now, if you're 3-3, then we're going to talk about just being average. 4-2 is the difference between being good and the difference between being average at 3-3. So we shall see. We'll continue to watch and debate tonight on the podcast. So don't worry, we're going to get into it. Mr. Jerry, we're actually wondering where you are. Good to see you, Mr. Jerry. Now, when it comes to preparing to face the Texans, there's actually one name, and I normally don't bring up young quarterbacks like this, except when they're mobile. When they're mobile, young quarterbacks are always like, well, damn, the Saints are going to lose. But CJ Stroud is not who I would refer to as a young mobile quarterback. Now, he's a guy that I feel like is a talented young quarterback who can move if he needs to, but I don't look at CJ Stroud as a guy that's going to go out and just dominate with running. In fact, he's only got 53 yards rushing on the season. They've stick to Dameon Pierce as their running back. But one thing that he has done really well is protect the football. Now, I think part of this is the fact that the Texans offensive line, even through injury, has done a good job of protecting CJ Stroud. And even though he's been pressured, he has found ways to not get sacked. So far this season, through 5 games, the Houston Texans have only allowed CJ Stroud to be sacked. I would call this impressive. You let me know if you agree or disagree. He's only been sacked 11 times. Now, I say only because y'all have been watching the Saints. And the pace that we were on to start the season was far worse than that. If you're curious where Derek Carr is at, Derek Carr has been sacked 15 times. 9% of Derek Carr's dropbacks resulting in a sack. 9%. Whereas for CJ Stroud, it is 5.6%. Now, I'm not saying 5.6% is the best number in the league, but it certainly is a good number, and that's led to him to have 0 interceptions thrown so far this season. Whereas, obviously, we're looking at Derek Carr. He has thrown 2, which is not bad. In fact, it's a 1.3% of his throws this season have been interceptions. But I think where the sacks have really impacted Derek Carr the most is the fact he's only thrown 4 touchdowns, 2.7%, whereas CJ Stroud's touchdown percentage is 3.8, which is definitely much closer to where you like it. So you have a nice quick release with the young quarterback. In terms of the offensive system that they use in Texas, definitely get the ball out quick. That's by design. And they have a very impressive group of wide receivers to help facilitate that and also get yards after the catch. So these are all things that you have to worry about when you're talking about New Orleans Saints defense. And I wouldn't go as far as to say that, this defense is not prepared. I still think this defense is one of the best defenses in the league. And if you're curious who the New Orleans Saints are going against, it's a Houston Texans offense that has faced the following opponents: the Atlanta Falcons, the Pittsburgh Steelers, Jacksonville Jaguars, Indianapolis Colts, and the Baltimore Ravens. Here's what they have scored in those games. I think this is very important. Against the Atlanta Falcons, they only scored 19. That was in the loss last week. Against the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Jacksonville Jaguars, they scored a combined 67 points. Very well, very good. They looked hot. In the first two games of the season, they scored 9 against the Baltimore Ravens and 20 against the Colts. So the question becomes quality of defensive play, and is the New Orleans Saints defense good enough to stifle and stymie the potential attack of the Houston Texans? So it actually goes a little bit farther than that. If you look in those games in terms of passing yards, you look at the week one, only 196. Now, that was the first start, so maybe that's just not a great indicator. But you look at last week, only 249 passing yards. So talking about a team that can struggle to win against elite defenses, maybe, and you would expect in losses to have more passing yards, not less. So this is where you need Carl Granderson to show out. Now, we just gave Carl Granderson a lot of love, but on the same time, he wasn't exactly going against Laremy Tunsil. Now, depending on the severity of Laremy Tunsil's injury, it can impact him even if he plays or not. For those that missed it, he has a knee injury. Now, I'm not saying you want to take advantage of it in terms of a malicious way. You don't want to attack his knees or anything. But if you have any type of situation that's limiting his ability on the field, you certainly want to take advantage of it with things like twists, stunts, blitz packages from the nickel guy, whatever you need to do to try to force a situation that puts you in a good spot. And that's also going to help with the coverage issue, because when it comes to coverage, one of the things that you see Houston do a lot of, they're like the antithesis of the Pete Carmichael offense, at least prior to week 5. They use motion on seemingly every play. They're always moving somebody around. And, there was a couple plays I was watching where they had 2 guys that moved around and had motion, and what ended up being just a simple Yankee concept. Yet that movement helps show the coverage that CJ Stroud is going to be facing. That movement helped add a little bit of variety and a little bit of second guessing amongst the defenders for whatever team we'll bring up. Because again, this motion thing is consistent. New Orleans is going to be tested on how fundamentally sound their coverage ability is, as well as can they manage to get pressure with only 4 like they did against the New England Patriots. And they are going against, in my opinion, a much better offense. Even though I don't think that the Houston Texans are a top 5 or top 10 team in any area, they are solid. And when I say solid, here's where they rank in terms of points forced. Offensively, they're the 12th best team in the NFL in points forced. Again, kind of grain of salt, because almost half of their points, actually more than half of their points, have come from 2 games. 2 games. Which again, we're not trying to belittle them. We're just simply putting it in context. And they ranked 11th overall in yards. They're also 7th overall in turnover margin. They don't force a lot of turnovers defensively, but they also don't turn over the ball very much. Again, CJ Stroud has yet to throw an interception. And if it took him into 6 weeks in the year, even if he threw 2 interceptions against the Saints, speaking it into existence, it'd still be a phenomenal season for him that he's made it 6 weeks into his starter NFL career and has yet to throw an interception. So New Orleans not only has to be able to respond to what they're going to see. But again, it goes back to what I've said before. They need to dictate what that Houston Texans offense is doing. You need to get them off their game, and playing fundamentally sound is going to help with that. Now, Christian says, do you think we will see a lot of match or split field, half man, half zone for Stroud? What I think you're going to see is New Orleans stick with what they do a lot of. Do they play quarters match? Absolutely. Do they play, Tampa 2? They've done a lot of Tampa 2 this year. And do they play cover 6? Yeah, they've done it all. I think it's really going to depend on what you see after that first quarter from Houston. And the reason I say that is, even though we've debated over how good Pete Carmichael is, one thing that most of us will not debate is how good Dennis Allen has been, not only in terms of play calling, but also adjustments. He does a really good job with his adjustments. And even if they come out strong against him early on, I have confidence that by the second and third quarter, he can adjust based on what they're seeing. Because one neat thing about Houston, I actually really like what they're doing. They have varied looks game to game. There aren't a lot that you can just go, hey, tendency, right? They aren't just predictable. Now, predictability is kind of a buzzword, and I'll admit that I personally probably use the word predictability a little much, but I do think that they provide a lot of variance. So, for example, to give you a kind of like an example of how they aren't like the most predictable team in the world, the Houston Texans, 2nd and 10 rush rate following incompletion is about 43%. Whereas the New Orleans Saints, if they throw an incomplete pass on first down, 50% of the time this year, they rush the ball. What is that in terms of comparing around the league? That is the 2nd highest mark. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're right in the middle of the pack, you're not predictable, because a run is without context. Like, is it a split zone run, pin and pull? Is it a reverse? Is it power, man blocking, duo? Are we doing inside zone, outside zone? What exactly is a run, right? Besides it being a run. But what I will say is that Houston is a team that doesn't have as many obvious tendencies as you can just pick out and say, hey, look for this. That's a good thing. Then we need to talk about when it comes to being aggressive. How aggressive are they as a team? And that might be one of the areas that you would say solid but not amazing. And what I mean by solid but not amazing is they're not making huge mistakes. Hence, obviously, not coming in and throwing interceptions. But at the same time, if you go into big-time throw percentage, CJ Stroud is actually towards the bottom of the NFL in big-time throws. It's also one of the reasons that he's one of the NFL's best in turnover-worthy plays. So they try to make a lot of their plays happen with things like yards after the catch, which is fantastic. I actually love that system. It's kind of what you're supposed to do in a West Coast system. But you know what? We're not getting into hating. We're coming off a win, and we're going to believe in greatness for the offense, right? So let's talk about what that offense is trying to do over there. So number one, Nico Collins. If you don't know the name, remember it. Nico Collins has 213 yards after the catch for the Houston Texans so far this season. To give you a comparison, kind of like, hey, where are the New Orleans Saints at, to, provide some context there. We know the New Orleans Saints ranks worse in most categories than the Houston Texans offensively, even though they're talented. Chris Olave leads the New Orleans Saints in yards after catch with 118. Yeah, it's like half. I don't know if y'all have ever taken like an elementary math class. That's low. So what Houston wants to do is they want to put their guys in a position to make a play instead of making a play. Does that make sense? They're not trying to beat you over the top. Now, I'm not saying they won't try, because as I talked about 10 minutes ago, a Yankee concept. Well, we know the New Orleans Saints run it. Heck, I've got a t-shirt of it. It says pull the trigger on it. Check out revdeuce.com if you want to support the channel. But what I am saying is that the Houston Texans are trying to put their guys in a position to create plays instead of making plays. They're not going to try to go out and hit you with a 50-yard bomb. They will try those attempts. But here is where this team is. Nico Collins, 213 yards after catch. Tank Dell, 97 yards after catch. Damian Pierce, the running back, 86 yards after catch. Got to watch the swing routes. Got to watch the screen game. So you're talking about, of those four guys combined, about 500 yards after the catch. Whereas if you take the New Orleans Saints top 5 guys, it's less than Houston's top 3 combined. In fact, the New Orleans Saints have 472 as a team combined yards after catch. The top 4 guys for the Houston Texans basically got that. So that is just the style of offense they try to run with CJ Stroud. They get the ball out of his hands quick, and they try to create misdirection with motion pre-snap, and then doing things like rub routes and pivot routes and different reads with the offense early on. So trying to get them off the game is going to be big. And a way to do that defensively, reroute them. If they're lining up in bunch situations, smash them in front of 5 yards, whether it's with an offensive or defensive lineman, whether it's with a linebacker, whether it's with a DB. Get in their way and disrupt timing. That means you got to be very aggressive. And it's not always about blitzing. Aggressive play calling on defense is not always about blitzing. If you know that they want to run mesh concepts and screens, then get in their face and contact them. Play them press, get up in their mouth, and make sure that they know that they can't just find open areas in the space. Their offense is clearly designed to be a team that is going to stress you horizontally more than vertically, and they're going to try to get big chunk yards by yards after the catch situations. Which, again, I'm not faulting their offense. I'm simply saying that if you're going to face them, these are the things that you need to do. And I love some of the things that they have come and drawn up. And again, if y'all aren't familiar with what's going on over there in Houston, you should check it out. Their offensive coordinator is Bobby Slowick. and the coach is DeMeco Ryans. Obviously, DeMeco Ryans is a name that many of you will be familiar with as a player. Well, guess what? Players sometimes become coaches. So DeMeco Ryans has been the head coach now in his first year, but he was the defensive coordinator for San Francisco for 2 years. So defensive-minded coach, but a very good, respected coach. Not to mention the man played in the league for like a decade. He was a multiple-time Pro Bowler, and yeah, he was pretty good. He was pretty good. I think he made an All-Pro 1 year. So pretty good guy. But if you're curious who the offensive guy is, Bobby Slowick, and I'll be honest, he's another one of those guys that many of you Saints fans would be like, why couldn't we do that? He's a young, up-and-coming passing game coordinator. Tell me where you've heard this before. So if y'all have never heard of Bobby Slowick, he worked and learned under Kyle Shanahan with the San Francisco 49ers, hence DeMeco Ryans bringing him over. But he's 36 years old. He's 2 years older than me. Yep. He's young. It's his first year as an offensive coordinator ever. He was a defensive assistant before switching to being an offensive assistant. His first role in the NFL was actually in the Shanahan tree with the Washington, at the time, Redskins as a defensive assistant at 24 years old. So this man has been in the league a while now, operating out, and now he's got an offensive coordinator job at 36. One of those young and up-and-comers they talk about who brings in like a modern offense and invigorates the team with new ideas. Really weird concept. Really weird concept. If only the Saints had somebody that could potentially do the same role in their own facility. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about. So anyway, like I said, you're looking at a very similar tree in terms of like, if you ever wonder like what I want the Saints offense to be, it's similar to what Houston runs, right? That style of West Coast offense that's predicated on short to intermediate passing, yards after catch is a focus, and getting playmakers in space. Literally, you talk about what a modern West Coast should probably look like. Look at the Houston Texans. It's not perfect, hence why they're a 2-3 team. But in terms of young and up-and-coming teams, I love the coaching staff that they finally have in Houston. I do think that CJ Stroud is a very good player in terms of a young guy who can grow, and I'm very curious to see where Houston is at in 3 years. I truly, truly am. But if you're curious what a West Coast offense is typically supposed to look like, Houston Texans. On the flip of that, guess who has a defense that usually dominates versus a West Coast offense? Dennis Allen. So now there are times where Dennis Allen does not do great against the West Coast, and that's usually just based on the head coach, like a Shanahan. But in terms of the stuff that the New Orleans Saints are going to run, especially with the match systems, and especially with the man coverage, they tend to have the ability to work against that. But the match being key. So having Maybach should hopefully help, and having the front seven have some contact up front would hopefully help. I'm very, very, very curious to see what the New Orleans Saints present as a defensive front early in that game. I mean, that's really going to be kind of like the main stuff that I'm looking at there, because this is going to be a great test for Dennis Allen. Does he still have it? And do some of these elite play guys still have it? Does Cameron Jordan still have it? Does Demario Davis still have it? You know, Marshawn Lattimore, who I didn't think had an amazing game. I want to see him bounce back, have an amazing game. Does he still got it? How's Alontae Taylor going to get stressed? Alontae Taylor is going to be a name to watch in this one. Again, West Coast offenses love to stress the short to intermediate parts of the interior of the field. Remember how I talk about Derek Carr, West Coast quarterback, wants to attack the middle of the... It's like a pattern, y'all. It's almost like you can study football and understand what's supposed to happen. It's weird. So Alontae Taylor is like a guy to watch. Can Alontae Taylor maintain coverage and avoid rub routes and still find a way to make a play when needed? Again, this isn't to speak negatively of him, just simply saying what the New Orleans Saints have got to do to win. Pete Warner's also going to have to really come in with his A game. I expect the New Orleans Saints to have a lot of nickel looks in this game. I expect to see the Saints have a lot of nickel looks. And that means that Pete Warner's going to have a stress to not only defend against the run in a very good way, he's going to have to be consistent as a pass defender. And I'm not saying he's done terrible. Here is where the New Orleans Saints currently rank in terms of defense and the ranks allowed, if you will. So, your New Orleans Saints, let me make sure we're on the right numbers. Here is where Pete Warner is. He's allowing a 72 QB rating, which is nothing bad. But I would say that the QB rating is a little misleading. Here's why. He's allowed 81% of the passes thrown his way to be completed. But the reason he has a 72 rating is, number one, he hasn't given up a touchdown, which credit to him. He has not given up a touchdown, but he has that interception. And that interception wasn't exactly on him. Not that I'm trying to take it away from him. He was in a good place, right time, but it's not like he forced that interception in coverage. So he is probably closer to a 100 rating allowed than the 72 that he has. He's going to make sure that he has to step the game up. And the big thing for me is he needs to have that completion percentage come down. I need it to be closer in that 60% range, not 80%. For example, you talk about what Alontae Taylor's been doing. Alontae Taylor's allowing 60% of the passes thrown his way to be completed. Now, he's been targeted the most. And when I say he's been targeted the most, they have really, really tried to come after Alontae Taylor in 5 weeks. He's been targeted 40 times. By comparison, Marshawn Lattimore has been targeted 23 times. Tyrann Mathieu, 17. Like, I realize that he's a safety, but he also plays robber. He comes down to the box. Isaac Yiadom, 17. And that's when they were going after that man. Alontae Taylor is the target. Like, that is who teams are trying to pick on as the weak spot. And one of the biggest reasons why is because he leads the team in missed tackles. Alontae Taylor has a 17.2% missed tackle percentage right now. Now, again, this is not an Alontae Taylor hate episode. This is just me trying to tell you as a fan, here's what to look for. This Houston Texans offense, West Coast, gets the ball moving short to intermediate, and they want to create movement in space, which means Alontae Taylor is going to be a natural target. It means he's got to be up on his A game. He's going to need everybody to make sure that they have his back, and he's going to have to play one of his better games of the season, simply because of what this team wants to do over in Houston. So we'll see what that ends up being. You know, the biggest issue, I think, for me is the Saints have got to build a lead offensively. The reason I say that is if you want to force CJ Stroud into mistakes, you have to build a lead, because I'm just going to keep it real. CJ Stroud is not playing from behind a ton, and he's not having to force plays. Now, that's a good, that's fantastic for Houston. You don't want to put your guy in a position to make mistakes. But if you want to be the first team to call CJ Stroud to throw an interception this year, you need to be the team that puts him into playing more than the, hey, I'll take the 6-yard dump off or the 6-yard out route, the 6-yard cross, because I have to go for that 15-yarder. You need to force him to be in a position to make a big play. Again, this goes back to what I said. The Houston Texans want to get the ball to their guys so that they can make a play. They don't want to make a play as in the initial play is the design. They want a guy to get the ball and then make something happen. So you need to switch that. You need to make it to where the pressure is on a rookie quarterback to win this football game. And if you get beat by a rookie quarterback, you get beat by a rookie quarterback. But that's the method. That is the modum operandi for winning against the Houston Texans. You've got to get them to allow that rookie quarterback to be a rookie quarterback. You've got to pressure him in ways that he's not used to and force him into situations that he hasn't faced a ton, right? And this is a home game for them, but we also know that Houston often is kind of a home game for the Saints. There's a lot of Saints fans in Southern Texas, a lot of Saints fans obviously in Louisiana, and it's a very close little drive. If you've never made the drive from Houston to New Orleans, it's not far at all, right? So this is definitely a match where hopefully Saints fans travel really well, and we'll see how that plays out. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about Texans offense, Saints defense. Let's flip it to the other side. So if you missed it, New Orleans.football posted a video that they then took down of Brooke talking about Andres Peat starting at left guard during practice on Wednesday and James Hurst starting at left tackle. That was taken down. So I reached out to a couple people like, okay, what the heck's going on? Is this legit? Is this real? And again, I told you at the beginning of the show that I do not know the answer. I'm going to tell you the two things I was told because I have no bloody clue, okay? To be very clear, this is not Rev trying to start drama. This is Rev simply saying that I tried to find out. I don't know. Here's the conflicting things I got because I legitimately don't know. All right, so one person told me that it was a disciplinary action. That's why Penning wasn't in that starter rep, which could mean a variety of things. And then I was talking to somebody else. I said, no, he's getting benched because he sucks. Now, by my charting and the film studies that I put out, Penning has not been the worst offensive lineman on this team. That's been James Hurst. Now, there is one thing that James Hurst does better than Trevor Penning. And this could be the critical reason as to why if he ends up getting benched. One thing that James Hurst does do better than Trevor Penning is outside zone, inside zone, and split zone blocking. Essentially, zone blocking. Hurst is superior to Trevor Penning. Why is that important? Because your offense for the past 2 weeks has finally felt a little better, and a lot of that has been because of Alvin Kamara. And Alvin Kamara's style is outside zone, inside zone, split zone. That doesn't mean that Alvin Kamara can't run duo, and he can't run toss sweep, he can't run crackback blocks, everything. But what he is best at is zone running. Always has been. That's always been his bread and butter. He is a one-cut zone running back. That's just his style. With him still being probably the biggest part of this offense, I understand if that's what they choose to do, the logic behind it. The only drawback is it's still 2023, and it's still a passing league. So Hurst can benefit AK, but if that becomes a detriment to Derek Carr, who finally last week looked like the Derek Carr you wanted. Now, when I say that, you're going to look at Derek Carr's stat sheet and go, well, that doesn't look like a great player. Okay, context, always important. Here's why I'll look at Derek Carr against New England and go, okay, finally, Derek, you're doing what I thought you would do. Now, some of his passes were still off. He had a lot of passes that were sailing high. We think a lot of that has to do with the shoulder. But Derek Carr only threw for 183 yards. However, just between two passes Chris Olave should have brought in, the touchdown pass and one over the left deep that he dropped, that's not even counting a third one that he also dropped. Two of those alone would have accounted for about 60 yards. If you talk about the three passes that Alvin Kamara himself said Chris Olave should come down with, Derek Carr would have ended at right around 270 yards and 3 touchdowns. So when I say that Derek Carr finally looked good, New England was like one of those final games where, okay, cool, he's not top 5, but finally there's the guy. Like, finally, there it is. Decent pass protection, and finally he looks decent. He just doesn't look amazing. But if it wasn't for the drops and the problems that Chris Olave is playing through, and I'm not trying to hate on Chris Olave, when Alvin Kamara, who is apparently now your team leader, which I love about him, by the way, is calling you out, it ain't just Rev being a hater. It's, hey, Chris Olave is too talented to perform like he's done the past 2 weeks. So it's nice to see Derek Carr finally doing well. Again, be very clear. I'm not saying Derek Carr is amazing, but remember how I just talked about how the Texans offense likes to play. And they're very conservative offense, as in they don't take a lot of risk, big time throws, but at the same time that translates to low turnover play. Well, did you know that Derek Carr is actually towards the top of the league in not having turnover worthy plays, while at the very same time, he's actually in the top 10 of all NFL quarterbacks in big time throw percentage. So they go for the big play, and they're not turning that big play into turnovers. Hopefully that continues. So Derek Carr has continued to improve, even though his past 3 week stat lines look terrible. Some of that is going to be on execution and players. Some of that 3 weeks ago is play calling. And again, none of this is me saying that Derek Carr is a top 5 quarterback, simply that he definitely was better in New England than the stat sheet would show. A lot of that, he had better pass protection. And I also was very adamant that I believe that the New England Patriots defense is something that provides a legitimate challenge. New England Patriots offense is boo-boo garbage, right? They're trash. The Saints defense got to pad all their stats against the New England's offense. That doesn't mean the New England's defense is stupid. Like, they are still a decent defense. Even without Judon, still a decent defense. And yet the Saints had a good day against them. And that's all that matters to me. The Saints offense had a good day against them. That's all that matters to me. That defense for New England is still the 8th ranked defense in the NFL. They just happen to have the 32 ranked offense in terms of points scored. So it was good to see a lot of those positives with the better play calling, the less tendencies or more tendency breakers, the better zone running from Alvin Kamara, the better pass protection. So the only concern I have with if Trevor Penning is being benched, if the benefit is to Alvin Kamara, but hopefully not to the detriment of Derek Carr. And I'm curious to see how that actually ends up going. So Don says, that's why I'm not overly optimistic about how he played. He only had 180 yards. He still looked good, but I just see more consistency. I think my big issue with that, and I don't have an issue with what you're saying logically, Mr. Don, but my rebuttal is simple. Your number one receiver, Chris Olave, number one guy, the guy, had 3 passes that he dropped that he would, hell, he made them. Remember against Tennessee, he made the one-handed amazing catch? The guy was making them the first 3 weeks of the season. He had 3 of those catches, 1 for a touchdown, 2 for 20-plus yards, that account for about 75 yards that he just went, never mind. So then when you go from 180 yards and 2 touchdowns to 267, 270-ish yards and 3 touchdowns, you change. You don't say that that's elite, but you go, damn good game. And it literally was just those 3 things by your number 1 receiver not bringing them in that change it. I mean, Chris Olave left about 65, 70 yards on the field, if not more, depending on how many plays you want to critique. Now, only critique him because he's not Keith Kirkwood. If it's Keith Kirkwood, don't worry, buddy. You'll get him next time. Chris Olave? No, sir. Chris Olave doesn't get slack because he's a star and he's done it. Right? Chris Olave, I watched him against Tennessee. Remember, he started the first 3 weeks of the season, 100 yards every game. And he's combined for 16 yards over the past 2. And even if we talk about him having a toe injury, that doesn't account for the fact that his hands haven't been as handsy as before. So he just has to be more consistent. You know, if he's going to be the number 1 guy, if he's going to be the star wide receiver, you expect him to come down with those balls, which is why they design those plays and throw it to him anyway. And it's not like Derek Carr threw bad balls. The one on the sideline where Chris Olave only gets 1 foot in, perfect ball. How do I know it's perfect? Go back 2 games. They did the same thing. Chris Olave caught it on the opposite sideline. Same play. Touchdown. You can't tell me the touchdown ball wasn't perfectly thrown. Chris Olave drops it. Hits the ground. Ball goes in the air. So, again, this isn't a Derek Carr secretly great. This is just a Derek Carr finally looked like what you wanted Derek Carr to be, but now you need Chris Olave to be what he's supposed to be. You know, it's one thing after another with his team. Like, they're so close to being good. They really are so close to being good. It's right there. They got to grab it. It's right there. And DePriest, I see it. Any particular reason we rarely use play action? Feels like our offensive identity could be a strong run game and play action. I just don't see it, though. So hear about this. Let me throw out a negative real quick. Derek Carr sucks at showing play action right now. Don't have a reason as to why. But there are actually a couple play action attempts. They just don't. The sell is awful. His sell of play action, and I'll only use the New England game for reference because I specifically looked for it in New England. When they did call play action, it was so bad you could barely call it play action. A couple of them were, not all of them, but there was one, a good example. You remember the Kendre Miller big swing pass? He goes and takes it. In fact, I have it on Twitter. I will put it up and let y'all watch it real quick. So it was actually a fantastic play, and we love fantastic plays. So what I'll do is I'll put it on the screen so that y'all can see it and know what I'm talking about. Ready? And go. Let me make sure that y'all can see it. All right, I'll keep it minimized and y'all can watch it that way. Okay, so the whole reason I want to show this on the screen, I'll describe it for those who are watching. The New Orleans Saints did a fantastic job attacking the middle. They did much better this time with the Yankee concept. And the New England Patriots bought it so much that the safeties and the corners turned their focus inside, which this was a good job by Carmichael to adjust. He has Kendre Miller chip on the outside and then go out for a swing pass with the middle of the field being attacked deep. So drawing all the coverage up and into the middle opens up the flat. Good play design, Pete Carmichael. But if you look, this is actually a play action motion, but the sell is absolutely god awful. It's a terrible sell. It's not believable at all. Now, it's still an amazing play. It's a great job all around. I love Pete Carmichael adding in the variation. I love the chip there to make sure that you're helping out your tackle. I like it. The split zone motion helps out pinning on the backside. Everything about this was a better play than what the New Orleans Saints have been running in the first 3 weeks of the season. So, Pete Carmichael, you get a hand clap. And if anybody watches this play and doesn't give Pete Carmichael a hand clap, you're just being a hater for no damn reason. But the key is the actual play action part of it, like making it look like Kendre Miller is actually going to get the ball, was awful. Like that was not believable at all. Like nobody's going to bite on that. So the purpose of that simply being, if there is something negative to say about Carr from that game, he's got to get better in those situations. And it's weird because play action is actually one of the things that he did really well his career is with the Raiders. So we'll see how that goes out. carry out your fakes, make them believable, make them respected, and they'll have more of an impact. But I do agree with you, DePriest, that they need to call more play action. I think play action is effective no matter whether you're running for 7 yards a carry or 3 yards a carry. Play action matters, and play action is effective. We just need to see them utilize it more often. And if they do that, then I think that you're going to have more success than you've seen already. And I think that that was one of the positives, is to see them calling it. I just don't feel like sometimes they did it effectively. But again, when I am harsh on a guy and I say that somebody is doing badly, I also want to give them credit when they're doing well. P. Carmichael called a better game. A better game. Was it perfect? No. But he needs to get credit for having called a better game. I still fuss at him for him getting really conservative and, in my opinion, kind of like lazy in the early third when he took his foot off the gas. But that first half did better, for sure. No Cap says, so what you're saying, Carr sucks at selling play action. So is that fault not establishing the run, which is fault the O-line, which is fault to Doug? Wow, that is some, hey, No Cap, were you raised by a Louisiana woman? Because that's some toxic nature right there. I'm just kidding. Honestly, I don't read that deep into it. What I would actually read into it is Derek Carr has been hit and pressured so much, maybe he's afraid for his life. He doesn't want to take his eye off that defensive line more than he has to. But no matter what, you do need to sell the play action well for it to work well. Like, people have to believe it's happening. You can't just like go back there, half turn your back, and then turn back around. Like, it's got to be believable. So I get why he might fear that. But at the same time, if you want play action to be effective, you have to actually do play action. And that's the action part of the play. So I agree. They should do more of it. They should continue to use motion. They should continue to get this team more like the Houston Texans West Coast offense. He's sweet baby Jesus. If you would have told me that we'd have been saying that 4 years ago, I would have called you crazy. But this is the topsy-turvy world we live in, mirror universe over here, where I wish the New Orleans Saints West Coast offense was closer to the Houston Texans West Coast offense. But neither here nor there. We're about 45 minutes in. We're going to get some over and unders and some predictions from you out there in YouTube land. So, number one, I'm going to hit you with 8 touchdown passes have been thrown by the Houston Texans. New Orleans Saints hold the Houston Texans to half, so that means 1 or less passing touchdowns in this game. Who's taking the over? Who's taking the under? This would be a pretty serious win if New Orleans manages this. CJ Stroud has thrown 7, and then don't forget Devin Singletary threw that touchdown pass for 6 yards. Very impressive, sir. Very impressive. But the only game CJ Stroud's not thrown a touchdown in was his first game against Baltimore. The only one. Every other one he's had a touchdown. 1 last week against Atlanta, 2 against Pitt, 2 against Jacksonville, 2 against Indianapolis. So they are throwing effectively when it comes to that. So over-under on New Orleans Saints holding them without a touchdown or simply allowing passing touchdown. TJ takes the over. And Giovanni says 3 TDs, 300 yards for Derek. I would love to see it happen. The big key for me is Chris Olave returning back to Chris Olave. If you would have had Chris Olave from week 1 in the game against New England, he might have had 300 yards and 3 TDs. He really might have. If nothing else, it would have been 250 to 275, which we've been wanting that to happen anyway. So we'll see. We'll see. Yeah. You'll be thrilled if Carr goes for 300 yards and 3 TDs. I mean, I would love it to happen, but I don't think the team needs it to win. I don't think it's needed to win, but I do think it should happen. The Antonio says, Carr is pretty athletic. I've seen play where he has room to make a run. He does not take it. Feels like he kind of did in Oakland. I mean, the truth is not all quarterbacks want to make that move, right? They don't want to move and go out and run. And if you look at Derek Carr historically, that's not necessarily been his thing. He doesn't really go out and do that. He will, but last year, I think he had like 100 total yards rushing. I mean, that's just a very low output. Whereas you look at what guys like Lamar Jackson can do, obviously a mobile quarterback, get close to 1,000 yards, 700 yards, 800 yards. He prefers to pass first, throw. That's kind of like the only thing. We're either going to throw it away or we are going to run if it's a very short yard situation. Now, to his credit, he did take off a couple times against New England. I don't know if y'all remember this because it was a glorious game where the New Orleans Saints actually looked like a dominant football team. Really weird. Who knows how to really measure that success. But He actually took off and ran a little bit against New England. It was only a couple of runs, but, he did show a willingness to move. Just wasn't a lot. Really, you're only going to move if the pass protection breaks down. Hopefully, the wide receivers are good enough that doesn't happen. Caprice says over, under on the half int for CJ. I'm going to take the over. I think the New Orleans Saints forced CJ for the first interception of his career. First one. I think it's going to be the first one. Chemo says over on the New Orleans Saints allowing one or more passing touchdowns. They think it's going to happen. I need y'all to be more confident. No Cap says, so if Hurst and Peace start and Pete gets hurt, does Penning play left tackle or left guard? He'll play left tackle. Absolutely. They would move Hurst back to left guard if Pete were to get hurt, if he ends up being the starter. Don says, when quarterbacks get on the other side of 30, they tend to run less, as they should. I think that's all of us. In fact, of the 100 people watching live on this podcast, when's the last time you ran? Be honest. When was the last time any one of you ran? Out of 100 people, it's probably going to be 2. So most of us are over 30, and most of us no longer run. Welcome to old age, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Thomas, over under 75 yards. I'm taking the over. Why? Because why the heck not? I want him to dominate, and I'm going to speak his positivity into existence. Michael Thomas has been making TJ eat footballs all year long, and I want it to continue. By golly, Miss Molly, if he makes it to like 120-ish yards, he's actually going to be on pace for a 1,000-yard season if he averaged 55 yards every other game. Please continue to make that really just ridiculously stupid man, TJ, look bad. I'm taking the over. Michael Thomas, 75 yards. I just want him to get a touchdown, honestly. I would trade an extra 25 yards for a touchdown. Please let that man get a touchdown. That man needs a touchdown. 6 games in, he's got good yardage, and he's actually moving the chains really effectively. I appreciate him being a chain mover. He actually has 15 first downs on 26 receptions. I love it. Kind of need that man to get a touchdown, though. I want him. He deserves to get to the end zone. He deserves to get into the end zone. Now, for numbers, by the way, if you're curious what the secondary of the Houston Texans is allowing in terms of passer rating, their starting corner, Steven Nelson, is only allowing a passer rating of 50.2. 0 touchdowns allowed and 2 interceptions. Dangerous. Gotta be careful with that one. Shaquille Griffin, who you did see on the injury report, is allowing an 80.1 QB rating. No interceptions, but no touchdowns allowed. Talk about some of the other corners they've had splitting time and starting. Derek Stingley Jr., 83. No touchdowns allowed. If you're actually curious who's allowed touchdowns in their defense, Henry Toto, I can't pronounce his last name. Rookie. He's allowed one, linebacker and a starter. Eric Murray, the safety. DeAndre Houston Karsten, the free safety. But he's like a backup, like he's not even a full-time starter. And that's it. The Houston Texans defense has only allowed 3 passing touchdowns this season. That's it. 3 passing touchdowns. That's all, folks. That's all. That's it. That's it. Creole says, I pulled my hamstring. I pulled my hamstring just talking about running. All right, score predictions real quick because we got to wrap it up and I got to get my daughter into bed. I hear her screaming on the outside of my door. I think the New Orleans Saints lose this game. Why? Because when I said they lost against New England, they won. So we're going to continue with that juju. I'm going to say the New Orleans Saints are going to lose 27-21. 27-21 is a loss. So I'm going to continue with last year's juju and last week's juju. I'm predicting the New Orleans Saints to lose 27-21. Priest says over under 1 Chris Olave drop. I hope he's under. I hope to God he's under 2. I think he's going to have a bounce back game. He's healthy now. The foot seems to be working well for him, which is good. We like the foot being healthy. And I'm hoping he gets his confidence back and gets those hands working again. So I'm going to take the under. Chris Olave is going to reel it all in, get closer to those 100-yard games you become accustomed to seeing. 100-yard games you become accustomed to seeing. TJ predicts 24-14 Saints. Pre says 24-17 Saints. Oh, man. Y'all keeping it low scoring with that Saints defense still dominating. Who knew that Saints defense was one of the top defenses in the NFL? I mean, it's crazy, right? Isn't it? It's absolutely crazy. I hope it continues. I hope to goodness it continues. I really, truly do. Your New Orleans Saints, for those who are curious, their defensive DVOA ranking, because I do like DVOA as a metric, is 5th overall. They're a very good defense. Hopefully that continues. Chemo says 28-13 Saints. Michael Borland, 17-13 Saints. I'm going to need the New Orleans Saints score more than 17 points. If they score more than less than 20 points, we're going to be right back to complaining. Which is more likely, the Saints score 40 points or the defense scores 3 TDs? It's more likely that the offense scores 40 points than the New Orleans Saints defense scores 3 touchdowns. Yeah, that's definitely more likely. We'll see what happens. But that's definitely more likely. Yeah, also for those keeping up with the Sean Payton era, the Broncos are currently losing 10-0 to the Kansas City Chiefs. Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes have thrown an interception. Also, what's with Patrick Mahomes struggling? Patrick Mahomes is currently having a post-Netflix drought. He's got the Netflix curse. He starred in the Quarterbacks show, and he's currently struggle busing. So forget the Madden curse. It's the Netflix curse. I appreciate every single one of y'all. If you want to support the channel, check out the RevJuice.com New Orleans Saints merch, or donate to us so that we can make more film studies, more podcasts. You're all amazing. Join us on our Discord. Jerry says 31-14 Saints. I pray that you're accurate. Who dat? God bless. I love every single one of you. You're all amazing. Creole says 35-9 Saints. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. I will catch y'all after the game. Who dat? God bless. Catch you later.